Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session, which originally I titled it as So Your Bank Just Wrote a Letter, Now What Do You Do? But we changed it to slightly more formal. My name is Indus Khaitan, founder of Redblock, and your designated host for the next 45 minutes. My job is to keep the conversation flowing, and if necessary, mute out excessive security buzzwords, which three of us will utter. I am joined by two security heavyweights, Steve Zelensky, former CISO of Levi Strauss, and the only person I know who can talk third and fourth party risk while brewing a single origin espresso. And also with me is Gopi Ramamurthy, head of security, including AI security at Symmetry. He has been part of 300 plus audits and consistently maintained an impeccable record of zero findings. Gopi and Steve, glad to have you today afternoon.
Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon, Indus and Steve.
So together we'll unpack JPMorgan's politely savage. I found at least 7 very thinly veiled jabs in his open letter to suppliers, talking concentration risk, secure by default design, and why move fast and break things might now break your banking relationship with JPMorgan. So grab your coffee, drop questions in the chat, and let's deep dive in before someone's API key leaks on Twitter. So Steve, question for you. Why did a bank just clap back at SaaS?
So this may be a case where drinking 2 sodas a day is okay. Drinking 100 sodas a day is not okay. And so we've reached a magnitude of a consumption of a service that at this point is far outstripped its initial design design considerations. And I think to a certain extent, that's what we're seeing is we're using it, and the risks that we're having as we've embraced it far beyond what it was originally designed to do is what he's calling out in his letter.
Interesting. Gopi, same question to you. Why did JPMorgan decide to clap back at SaaS and now in 2025?
Good question. So we have been seeing trend adopting SaaS for last 10 years. But recently what happened is there's a big growth in SaaS, third party, fourth party, and fifth party. So we give the data to access to third party, and third party doesn't have time to develop all the features. They give access to our data to fourth party and fifth party to provide services, which as a CISO I don't even know. So now JP Morgan being moving close to $4 trillion assets under management, they need to pay attention what's going on, who has access to my financial and system framework, and right time they woke up and brought this letter.
Interesting. And Steve, you and I were just talking about the letter. So when you first read that, did you think about time, as you mentioned, or maybe more paperwork for everybody in IT and cyber?
Yeah. So when I first read it, what I simply thought was, look, this is not new, right? We've raised the alarm in the past periodically, like, this is bad for you to drink 100 sodas a day. But what we're seeing now is what I would maybe say is in him trying to raise it again is he's not just saying it's bad, he's showing some themes around defense in depth and around how the attackers are pivoting to take advantage of something that we've come to consume, right? And then I think about how have we over the years kind of had this conversation, right? And we talk about third-party risk management and fourth-party risk management and the vendor security assessments that we do, the VSAs, are effectively a paper exercise to trust me that I'm answering it accurately with no way of verifying it. Okay. And as SaaS has become insidious into not just ways of outsourcing things that are not core to the company, but are becoming the company, he's highlighting the fact that the adversaries are picking up on this, they're pivoting on this, and that certain security controls we've come to rely on, like identity and access management and authentication and authorization, and the fact that primarily we protect people in accessing business applications, that those use cases are no longer the primary ones that the business is developing in order to be able to do business, and that is opening up weaknesses in our traditional security stacks, architecture stacks, that in addressing that is fundamentally changing the way that we have to look at our business architectures.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Gopi, similar question. So you and I briefly chatted about this letter for like 30 minutes or so. What part hit hardest in your daily job if many of these become operational, such as, hey, he talked about so much angst against APIs and OAuth and hey, ship better code. What hit you hardest?
So I'll relate to our discussion as well as what Steve brought it up. The standard set of controls broken at many places, such as the identity perimeter. So we used to have identity under multiple layer, but with SaaS, the identity for the SaaS could be from our IDP through their IDP or only from their IDP. So the access control became complicated and many times it could be broken easily. Number one. Number two, the I implement CIS controls through to my organization, but the software footprint of what I directly control could be 8% or 20%. Because I'm using a lot of SaaS, my CS control could cover only 20% of whole software I control as a CISO, and 80% of my footprint could be outside of my control. So that hits me hard, even though I do security assessment, I do periodic access controls of my application as well as the SaaS. I always very nervous about am I my coverage is full or not. Number one. Number two, with SaaS they are updating every day, every week. I go and set security controls, security configurations for this SaaS, but over the updates and release, sometimes they were wiped out. Not only the user, we know who are all having access to the user, we set alert. But the security config we do for SaaS, sometime with their releases, they wipe it out. And I'm not sure. And for those, I don't even have option to set alert of my my preferred security config wiped out. I need to get alert. So these things keep me nervous about managing SaaS applications.
So let me dovetail on that, right? Which is, here's what I hear, right? Which was traditionally, let's just say traditionally for security as a CISO, right? I talk about what is my perimeter? Where's my perimeter? My network perimeter. How do I control the soft center and the hard edge? And for the most part, right, we had private data centers, or we went into virtual private data centers, and we established that all the applications run within my network perimeter, and my network firewalls were my primary edge to be able to protect. That's how we did it. Okay. And I could control 95, 98% of my destiny because I had everything within the data centers.
Right.
I could set a hard network edge. Well, when we went with SaaS, right, the sexy part of SaaS is I no longer have them in my data centers. I don't have to spend the time to stand it up, to own it, right? It's just a network connection. And I can go ahead and let the business move faster and outsource a whole bunch of functions that just don't make sense to have to stand up myself. Well, all of a sudden my network edge disappeared. And now if I look at my service edge, right, it's like, where's the service edge? Is it the data now that I'm having to protect? Am I relying on IAM to be able to do this? Am I looking at my laptop itself and my service edge is my web client? That transition, right, is what's happening now. Is I went from owning 98%, right, of my destiny and my network edge to maybe only actually having control over 20 or 30 or 40% of my edge, and the rest is all out in the SaaS. Okay, and all I can do is establish trust on my side to the SaaS, and I can ask for terms and conditions, and I can ask for VSAs, but I fundamentally have to trust these third and fourth party infrastructures with my data. So as a CISO, I've lost control of the majority of the ways that I can manage to protect my company. What do I do? We can argue all we want about whether SaaS is a bad thing, but it's how do I reestablish that edge where I can actually use technical controls and do things about it rather than just wring my hands and continue to try to hope that the other side does the right thing.
If you bring the foundational architecture of SaaS, that, hey, to your point, Steve, I don't own the network, I don't segment it. The only way to control is through identity. Now, identity as a perimeter itself is an oxymoron, because if you allow access, you could delegate to someone else. Is this an irrecoverable architectural decision that we made to go on to SaaS like 15, 20 years ago, and somehow we have to live through this? Or do you think there is a light at the end of the tunnel?
There's clearly light at the end of the tunnel, right? And what I say is, but the first thing is you have to understand what the problem is and that you acknowledge you have the problem, okay? And the way I characterize this is human identity management to a business application as authentication, and then role-based access control of authorization to the data in the business application for most of our careers is what our primary responsibility has been. Okay. Now what you're seeing is that this concept of identity is no longer a human in a business application. It's now the data itself. It's an API. It's API keys used in a whole variety of ways, including AI. So we're having to rethink identity and access management as to the types of identities that now fall into purview. And based on that and this delegation, how do I look at authorization? How do I look at contextual authorization? How do I look at continuous contextual authorization so that at a transactional level, not at a business level, I'm trying to understand not is this authenticated, not is it authorized, but is it appropriate at this point in time that the authorization should be executed? And that rethinking of identity and access management, right, and where we have to do it in the stack, I think is what many in the industry are now coming to appreciate as to how resiliency, okay, and identifying what's happening as opposed to just preventing bad things from happening are now becoming a primary thrust. And that is a very difficult thing for a lot of us to now have to embrace.
I think that's a great take. I'll have a follow-up on that to Gopi. So Steve pointed out, with the rise of APIs and of course API keys, and that's the delegate that you allow access to. In your opinion, Gopi, is this a friend or a frenemy that we are dealing with, or this is going to remain like this forever?
So I'll go back to my first point. The business is trying to grow, every business trying to grow and compete with their competitors, right? So the business would go and pick and choose what could deliver their growth and their venture into global markets and new products and M&A. So the problem going to get complicated now. For CISOs, how are we going to solve? So Steve touched so many things under identity. Within identity, he talked about multiple layers. So what I could add here is the access level and then access to what. So I used to work for FISO, and there not only data important, not only identity was important, the process in the night to post ACH for millions and millions of dollars across multiple, and then if we collect together billions of dollars of ACH money to be posted, the process. So we have data, we have identity, but if the process fails, there's a huge loss to the business. Now, what the way I'm relating to this is we talked about identity, and then we need to see the SaaS what identity level and what privilege level, what access level it has, not only to perform actions, also to the systems, also to the data. And this all getting complicated with SaaS. So going back to your question, is it going to be resolved or is it going to continue? My my response would be we have to resolve for the critical applications. We have say 120 SaaS applications or 200 SaaS applications. We as a CISO, smart CISOs, tier one, fine, which is my critical application, we have to solve. We have to work with our vendors to solve at identity level, data level, and process and privilege level. And being a smart CISO, we'll be able to figure it out. We'll be able to solve. For tier one applications, we have to solve. And tier two and tier three, we have to work on. But always, as a CISO, we'll have 100 things to fight against, but pick and choose the critical one. We have to solve them. So
Awesome.
So let me
Thanks for
dovetail on that, because you talked about
go ahead, Steve.
frenemy Indus, right? And what Gopi talked about. Well, I go, so who is the frenemy? Is it the SaaS vendor or is it my lines of business? Because as a CISO now, what we're trying to understand is that the relationship we have with the lines of business is changing, right? And many CISOs don't see that change, right? And I joking and I said, if the line of business would only do what I told it to do, okay, then I could guarantee that we won't be breached. You just have to do what I say. But the business says, yeah, but the friction of doing what you say is too high because I'm here to make money. And
right.
you're not understanding that that friction and the ability to make money is making you an enemy, and you keep telling me you're friend. Okay. So I'm pivoting that way to say, so a lot of what we're now trying to do is to be able to say, look, if I could stop the business and get it all right, and then you can go ahead and start, that's great. But that is not an objective view of reality as to what the business wants to do, is to go play in traffic. Okay. And for me to let them grow, I have to let them play in traffic. But how do I do it in a way that limits the likelihood that they get hit? And B, that I don't get blamed when they get hit. That is very different than me saying I'm going to secure the company and I'm just going to deploy 200 tools and tell poor Gopi that if you want to do the job, all you have to do is be in the office on my laptop, on my VPN, accessing these 8 applications that are least privilege, right? And you're like, so who's the frenemy here?
Right. Steve, I wanted to answer it directly, but I didn't say that way, but you put it the indirect way. Thank you.
Thank you for both for that. Love that comment. One of the things that Pat very specifically pins is OAuth and how he frames it as poorly scoped services trying to access calendars, and then, of course, potential lateral movement to get access to everything else. Steve, on question for you on this, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is absolutely Skynet style integrations that are happening in the world today, what Pat described, how worried we should be knowing that AI is looking for hundreds of API keys to access data. They're looking for elevated privileges to your shared Google Drives. In fact, today morning, ChatGPT or OpenAI announced integrations with Microsoft OneDrive and another vendor. Is this very, very real threat? Because if you are a CFO and God forbid, MCP AI agents have access to your shared folders, we have no idea where that's going to end up.
Yes. And again, that's why I get back to how well do we understand the business? Not how well does the business understand the value of security, but how well do we understand how business applications are interoperating with themselves before they touch a human, right? And so, like Steve's simple view of the world is OAuth is a proxy. It's how do I let somebody else, how do I let Indus be my proxy to be able to talk to Gopi so that I don't have to talk to Gopi directly, either because I don't want to or because I don't know I have to. Okay. And that was a great concept. And we implemented it when we were only talking to 4, 5, 6, 7 different business applications, right? And then we want to do some basic integrations. And so this OAuth was a great way of delegating, okay, with controls, SAML, and then ZACML, right, to know exactly what to do. Now look at what's happening, which is as a human touching a business application and leveraging that delegation to be able to be efficient. Now what we're seeing is there's going to be 50 or 60 applications that are all working on my behalf, at which some point they will ping me or I made a request and there's those 50 or 60 interactions that are occurring all behind the curtains. So what OAuth was designed to do 15 or 20 years ago, okay, is now you can either call it being overly permissively used or is being abused in what its original design center was for. And now you're seeing that explosion of all of this data exchanging, and we just don't have the right authorization models because we're still thinking about human interaction to a business application, not the speed of APIs just moving data through a CI/CD pipeline. So again, that's why I talk about the architecture and the appreciation for how the business model for app dev has moved from one of a sophisticated application developer to what I call the citizen developer, who is Gopi in the line of business using AI to build a relatively sophisticated website that has all the functionality they required, that is obsolete by design, okay? And me trying to get in front of that line of business and saying, you can't do that. Not happening. You know what I
Not
mean?
happening.
And so that's where I'm kind of using this analogy through everybody to realize it's how the business builds applications that has changed. And these are the underlying implications relative to my ability to put a trusted security edge to either secure the company or protect the company. What conversation do you want to have?
Fantastic. We have at least 6 or 7 audience questions coming in. Let's pick a couple of them, and I'll give one to you, Steve, another one to Gopi. So the first one is, I'm going to read it. So Patrick Opet says suppliers must prove they are secure by default. What concrete deliverables, such as S-bombs, continuous control telemetry, pen test evidence, will clear that bar without bankrupting a 30% SaaS startup? And then he talks about his SaaS startup.
I'm going to let Gopi go first on that one.
All right, Gopi, go for it.
So say a big corporation dealing with hundreds of SaaS vendors. So what a big
So
corporation,
this is potentially a founder, a SaaS founder on the other side.
That's right.
right? So the big corporation can actually look for certain things. Number one, external pen test, and it's not annual pen test. Basically, now there are a lot of automated pen test vendors and platforms available. So if that's one of the preferred way to look for running the test from external perimeters and testing applications not once per year but more often, number one. Number two, I have a big list. So running a mock exercise with them, say we have issue, see how soon the particular vendor respond from my tier one. I have a security issue. Can you call me back and see what is the response time and who in the level they're talking to us. So in case if there's real issue for a big corporation, we need to have a line already established and process everything works fine. Apart from pen test, there's a social or actual test. And of course, they need to meet their whatever the requirements, SOC 2 or PCI, HIPAA, the controls in place. The SBOM is a long list. And again, the vulnerability complete report is a long list. Have a conversation with them periodically based on the tier they fall in and check what you're worrying. You're sending your medical data and see whether how secure that is. You're running your financial transaction with that vendor, or they are falling in Visa network or MasterCard network, and where piece they fit in, see um, how secure their process and connectivities are. That conversation would definitely open up what you need to ask them again and where they fit in. And then you can probably, apart from all our standard lists, you can add few custom questions and custom things to follow up with them, and then you can follow with them. So that's what I would do. I would go with standard list more often, maybe continuous pen test, and then I'll have a conversation and then see what they're lagging and then would periodically follow.
Got it. Before I ask the second question to Steve, I was just looking at my list of quote unquote slap in the wrist that Patrick did for this particular topic. He says, secure by design is just a marketing sticker now. Vendors must go beyond slogans. And he attacks SOC 2 reports that they are once a year attestation, not security.
Mm-hmm.
So, Steve, question for you. You would love this one. How should CISOs quantify concentration risk for the board, market share exposure, blast radius simulations, or something more concrete?
Yes. And this comes back to, as a CISO, I say you have three ways of describing how you characterize your job, right? And I go, are you a CISO who believes your responsibility is to secure your company? Your job is to inflict as much friction into an efficient business process as you deem necessary to make sure that the company doesn't get successfully owned. Okay. And that's great if you can do that. And I go, well, what happens when the business rebels and says too much friction? We don't want you. Okay. Then the board says, well, thank you, Steve, for your time, but you're not the kind of CISO we need. because the business ultimately is making the money and has decided you are not the right candidate. We're going to go shopping for somebody else.
Right.
Okay, then you get to the next stage, which is you get to the CISO that's had these conversations and said, so what I have to do now is not secure my company. I have to protect my business. I have to be able to have a conversation with my children, which are all my lines of business, as to how much risk they are willing to accept versus my responsibility to have insurance policies against key risks that I know I must address because of the existential threat they have on the ability to make money. Okay. You go, now we're talking about cyber risk, identify, detect, respond, recover against an attack. Okay. But that only takes you so far because the business fundamentally says, I don't care about security. That's why I've hired you. I need to sell jeans faster. Okay. What are you doing to do that? So then I go, you get to the third level, which is your job is to enable the company to grow at the speed that it needs to and minimize the impact that cybersecurity can have, okay, on a substantial threat to the speed of revenue. So in essence, how do you sell more jeans as a CISO, not how do you secure the company, okay? Those are kind of the ways you characterize that. And then I hear okay, that's great, but that means I need to understand the business. How do I characterize security as a business value proposition? And I say to everybody here, I go, start this way. And I did this at Levi Strauss. So I'm not making this up. It's how I went through exactly that 3-stage journey there. And we went into the board and I said, I want to be metriced. I want my job to be evaluated on my ability to do the following 3 things for this company. 1, protect the brand. 2, protect the workforce. And 3, protect the supply chain. And I said, here's why. Because the only thing you all care about is selling more jeans. The Levi's brand is a $6 billion a year brand. Okay. If I damage the brand, they get it. So I go, that means the e-commerce website and consumer data has got to be protected. I go, second is protect the workforce. Everybody's getting phished. Social engineering attacks are my number 1 risk. People are my number 1 problem because people make mistakes. So what am I doing to characterize against that attack front and how am I protecting? And then the third is, if there's no jeans in the stores, I'm out of business. So I better protect my supply chain, both physical and IT, in order to make sure the key business processes are operating so we stay in business. Just positioning it that way and now saying against those 3 key business impact analysis events, here is my security posture and the risks that I am addressing in each of those and what I am not doing. That is a great way to understand now how the business does business and how you are protecting the business with life insurance policies and enabling the business to grow as fast as they can by teaching them, okay, if you're going to go play in traffic, don't do it during rush hour, okay? And we're going to have a better opportunity. And when you do get hit, this is my ability to limit the damage. So you're changing the whole dynamic as to how you have that conversation. And that's how I suggest you start.
Right.
That's very well said. Gopi, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I like to add. So what Steve told us, start with the business and brand, right? And I worked in finance and healthcare both as well. I would pick and choose what is the end of the day, what brings or what is the last mile that to be run and also brings the revenue to the company. So in the fintech, I was monitoring. I put additional security controls for ACH processing, so people can submit their transactions all through the day, 2 p.m. or 5 p.m. based, but the ACH has to be run, then the company would be paid $350 billion to be moved, reported to Fed, and then everything goes smooth, the company would get paid. So all the system framework, everything around that including customer data access, to be secured, and then that is the business. So similarly, he touched upon supply chain. To make that whole financial transactions, there are multiple vendors part of the supply chain. Their connections and their process have to be secured so that the money would come in and then would complete the financial transactions. So just to add what Steve said, that's the right way to summarize to the board. Put the what's where the revenue coming in connected to the business and who are the players, and then show how you're helping the business to secure and run the business.
Got it. Got it. No, that's very well said. Thank you for that, Gopi.
Mhm.
As I was reading Pat's letter, one of the things that I realized that is shipping fast, is shipping daily. If a SaaS vendor comes to me that we do bills every Friday, is the letter specifically calling out that that's a negative signal? Like, is move fast and break things essentially a malpractice from the lens of a CISO? Because it is very likely you did not run the pen test, very likely you didn't get time to do configuration, hardening, and testing of stress in the system. Is that the way we should operate? Somewhere in between, not every day, every Friday, but yeah, let's go back to a slightly more thoughtful timeline of delivering and shipping code. What do you think, Steve?
Okay. And there was a question that came in like this. I go,
Yeah.
hey, at the end of the day, okay, SaaS products themselves are foundational. They must have higher degrees of security built in. They must. They own that obligation. Okay. But they don't have the time or the money to necessarily do that right. Microsoft twice now has stood down their company and said, we are going to bake security in because we now understood our fiduciary responsibility to the larger industry, that our tools, our products are the foundations that other products work on. And if we don't get the security right, the whole thing is a house of cards. Well, to SaaS vendors, right, and that's what Opet's call is about, is you guys are now those foundational components. Like it or not, you're foundational. We in the larger industry as consumers need to appreciate that, and we need to give you a certain amount of latitude and time to build security into your products. That's where SBOM and shift left and secure by design are absolutely critical. But we focus primarily on operational technologies, right? Utilities and that kind of stuff, where the intrinsic value of doing that is obvious to all of us. And now what we have to realize is SaaS vendors, like the operating system, okay, is now foundational, and they have to bake in that capability so that we have more robust tooling that we're using. But for the startups, they don't have the luxury of time. They're going to get functionality out first because they have to survive another week and make payroll to eventually then bake more security in. Okay. Here's that frenemy conversation again. As an industry and all of us, we have to understand now that SaaS is like the operating system. All right. The SaaS vendors have to have the time to bake the security in for MVP. That means the venture community has to understand they have to have the money to do that. It means we as consumers, as CISOs, or more working with the businesses, have to figure out how we can delay that decision to be able to get that degree of rigor baked into SaaS. Okay. These are the conundrums that we're approaching here that he is calling out to the SaaS vendors themselves, right? I say this. What we all now realize, and we've talked about, is identity and access management, of being able to determine how data can flow between two identities of unknown types. and focus on the security controls to protect that edge and expose it that way is allowing you to cheat, to not be able to have to provide uniform security for everything, but to get to where the businesses are primarily stressing our security industry and our security controls to adapt to what the business wants. And let's get those right first while we execute the secure by design.
Right.
Awesome.
I could
Go
add
ahead, Gopi.
I could add simple analogy. In certain countries, Europe and Japan, they built the train system to accommodate train running more than 300 miles per hour. So what it means is the transportation running, they have added security, monitoring, everything they need to do so that the trains could run more than 300 miles per hour. So coming back to SaaS, now the delivery of the code, new code, reduced from 2 weeks to 1 week and day. So what Pat is telling is that's fine if you need to deliver for to run the business, to be competitive or to meet your customer demand, that's fine. But instead of you automating running 60 tests, you might have to do 200 tests to make sure you're not missing some security configuration. You run all the security check, including your code as an infrastructure, your security groups, your WAF controls, your user config. You automate them and check as you deliver. So you have been running mile train for 70 miles per hour. Now you want to run at 300 miles per hour to make money, but add those controls. This is not a new thing. Instead of 60 tests, you might have to run 220 tests. Of course, it could fail at the beginning, but over the time you could tune and then you could continue to deliver at the higher speed with higher confidence of security. So that's what he means.
That makes sense. So
Mhm.
let's conclude this in next 4 to 5 minutes and quickly discuss some remedies, some plan of attack, call to action. So I'm going to ask 3 questions to each of you. Take like 30 seconds to a minute.
Mhm.
What is that one hard question, Gopi, you would be asking to your vendors tomorrow?
So if anything related to whether the application I manage or they manage, the biggest thing I have is data security. So everything else I can bring it up. If the application goes down, I can bring it up. If I lose, I can throw more endpoints. But if I lose data and it can be replicated, it could end up in multiple hands. So I would start with how do you protect my data? So the evidence, and then I would work with them to make sure they are protecting my data. So that's the one question I would ask.
Same to you, Steve. What is that one new hard question you'd start asking your vendors tomorrow?
Sure. As a SaaS vendor, show me your secure software development lifecycle. I need to see that you have a foundational appreciation that you're establishing maturity at the application development level, because I can't put security on a non-existent process. And so what we're now doing is having an honest conversation that you could be a small company, and if you understand you have an SDLC process and what security you have, then I can grow with you. If you're a big company, then I better see that you have it consistently implemented across your large company. That's the question.
Next one for you, Gopi.
Sure.
One integration pattern you'd ban forever at your current company.
So long-lived API tokens or certificates that would, or even any identity with no MFA, anything that long lives and less security control, I would ban that integration.
Steve, same for you or differing opinion on that?
Ask me the question again.
One integration pattern you would ban forever.
Citizen developer. It's actually an emerging capability that I think is the worst possible trend, right? Because it's obviating all the work we've done to institute rigor, right, in engineering discipline, which is this ability to use AI to be able to use data that I've never seen before that the business has floating around in unstructured or semi-structured to go build a functional application that I have no visibility into, but they're going to make me responsible to protect it. I'm like, that is one of the emerging patterns that people aren't quite understanding, that this is the train wreck we're creating for ourselves, that security is not in a position, or even the CIO, to do much about. And those applications are SaaS applications because they're being built on the cloud. They just happen to be being built by the business.
Awesome.
Good.
Last one for you, Gopi.
Mhm.
And this question is made for you, looks like. Most bang for buck security control right now, like most cost effective
From the SaaS perspective,
from a SaaS perspective, correct?
yeah, I would. So we always focus on integrate like identity and access and all those things. What could we probably miss on is still I see many companies have not implemented continuous pen tests, either internal or things. So that needs to be changed, and there are automated continuous pen testing. The software can run internally as well as from externally. That's what need to change, and see that the pen test need to be run, and then it needs to be data centric pen test, not only app centric pen test. So app centric plus data centric continuous pen test. That's the one I'd like to see change. So
Same question for you, Steve. Most cost effective security control right now.
Okay, I'm going to answer it two ways, because if you talk to me in a proactive fashion, I go, identity and access management is the most cost effective and most important, because if I don't know who has access to what, every other security control is useless because the policies are garbage in, garbage out. Okay. Like, that's why I always say, keep it simple, get the IAM under control in whatever capacity you can. So at least you can argue that at least I know who has access to what, even if I can't stop them. Okay. But then the other part of me says, well, wait a minute. If I look at governance, risk, and compliance, okay, hiding in the herd says maybe my most important controls are the ones that generate the evidence of compliance for the auditors to say I pass, so that when I am breached, I can demonstrate that I hid in the herd and I was as good as anybody else, okay, to be able to limit the damage to my job. Which way do you want to go?
Bingo, bingo, bingo. So by the way, there's a joke somebody tossed into the chat, and I'm reading it. Most cost-effective security control, fewer integrations, and also doubles as a holiday for my team.
You know, and in security, we say, right, you can laugh or you can cry. Security for CISOs now is very, very difficult, right? Because we're in a war and we don't have everything we need. And it's really, really hard because we want to protect all of our children and we can't. And so you kind of find this gallows humor, which is we laugh a lot in security because it's our way of simply managing that stress. Okay. And so the joking and stuff that we do, a lot of people that are outside of security go, you know, you guys laugh an awful lot. And you go, that's because the alternative is to just cry. Okay. And just let the stress take you. And so this is our way of being able to manage the stress. I appreciate the humor.
Well, we'll almost at the tail end of this conversation. We have few questions still in the pipe. Steve and Gopi, should we take it or? take it off the air, depending on time.
Hey, I'm here for the community, so fire
All
away.
right, let's take it. So I'm going to read Robin's question, or rather a comment. Robin saying, the rate of ship is not my concern. The time on each build is the concern. The CI/CD should include SBD/PBD. The rate of releases could simply reflect the number of incremental releases. I worry about the stack of unresolved bugs. Comment?
So here's my view, which is we got to stop worrying about vulnerabilities. Okay, I can't patch 10,000 vulnerabilities, so I certainly can't patch 20,000. But what I can do is look at material exploitability. Okay, so let's not worry about the fact that we're building applications with more and more bugs being built in. We got to get smarter now about looking at shift right and understanding when we have vulnerable applications, most of which are, how they're being exploited in my environment, at which point is that exploit material, and then I have to do something about it. So it's causing us to look at resiliency now as a legitimate part of our strategy, whereas we primarily only want to rely on prevention and just patch everything to prevent it from happening.
Great answer. Gopi, anything you want to add?
I think Steve summarized very well. I think we can move on to the last pending question.
Yep. So Phil's asking, I think we answered this, but
Okay.
let's repeat it. Opet's call for advanced authorization, robust API security, and proactive threat detection. How can SaaS vendors implement this? And his question is from small startups and smaller firms lacking the financial resources.
So there are multiple ways to handle this, right? Starting from what level of access we need to provide, what open software we can use, what open scanner we can use. For small firms, there are multiple options available, and it comes with additional manual review. So because they're islands, the open software are islands, we can use them, but it requires one full-time employee to manage all of this along with other work. But there are ways to effectively identify and implement security at authorization and other control levels. So we can take offline and chat on that one. So
And I would say, to answer that, we need to start asking ourselves, not how do we make the security organization be chartered to have the most mature security maturity, but we now have to understand what's good enough security and where is the cybersecurity poverty line, so that for the younger SaaS vendors, what you have to demonstrate to me, your field CISO, to me as a CISO, is that you've understood the key risks and you've placed the bets on the things that are most likely to happen so that we can continue to survive another day, and that we're not trying to get ultimate maturity, we're trying to get appropriate security against the key risks.
right.
I'm on mute. Awesome. Thank you so much. And wrapping this up, appreciate your time, Steve. And thank you so much, Gopi, again, for coming on the call and, of course, doing this webinar. This cannot be a better unpack of Pat's open letter. So much so it's a warning shot fired. And when I read it for the first time, I felt like every SaaS vendor was being held by the collar on the wall saying, hey, answer me now. But I think it's his way of giving these alarm bells so that we build better software. This was very, very engaging and a lot of wisdom coming from both of you.
Yeah,
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Gopi.
Sure.
We'll talk again. Take care. Bye-bye.